The beginning of the end. In the grand tapestry of the universe, humanity's story was just beginning. The stars seemed to beckon, and the human race, ever curious, ever resilient, expanded outward to claim new worlds. Colonies were established on distant planets, thriving under human ingenuity, hard work, and hope for a better future. The human race, with all its imperfections, had spread its roots across the galaxy, eager to share its vibrant culture, its scientific advancements, and its unyielding spirit. But in the unseen corners of the universe, there was a quiet storm brewing, an ancient primal hatred that had been simmering for generations. The Andorians had been watching. The Andorians were no mere species. They were a brutal and calculating force. Their race had existed for millennia, long before humanity had even discovered the concept of space exploration. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity could have imagined at the time. They were a warlike people, shaped by centuries of conquest and bloodshed, their homeworld a barren, harsh landscape that forged warriors from birth. They despise humanity for one reason. Humanity's rise threatened their domination of the stars. In the quiet of their war council chambers, the Andorians watched as humanity's colonies expanded rapidly across the galaxy. It was inevitable, they knew. Humans were a resilient species. They could adapt, they could overcome, and they could thrive in ways the Andorians had never anticipated. The Andorians' reign over their own territories had always been unquestioned, their power absolute. But the humans, they were different. Their spirit was unstoppable, and their relentless exploration of the unknown posed a threat to everything the Andorians had built. So they waited. They watched the humans build, create, and expand, growing stronger with each passing year. The Andorians, cold and patient, began to make their plans. They knew their time would come, and when it did, they would strike with brutal efficiency. It wasn't until one fateful day in the depths of the galaxy that the Andorians decided to act. Their first target, Arcadia, a human colony on the edge of the settled galaxy. Arcadia was a jewel among the stars, a thriving world full of life, culture, and technology. It was everything the Andorians loathed, a symbol of humanity's potential. Arcadia had been untouched by war, free from the turmoil that plagued other parts of the galaxy. But that would change. The Andorians descended upon Arcadia like a storm, their warships filling the skies with ominous shadows. The attack was swift and deadly. Without warning, the peaceful skies of Arcadia darkened with the looming presence of Andorian ships. They had come with one singular purpose: to eradicate humanity's presence from the stars once and for all. As the first volley of plasma bolts rained down from the Andorian ships, the once vibrant colony was thrown into chaos. Buildings crumbled to dust, and the streets were set ablaze as the inhabitants fled for their lives. The air was thick with smoke, the once clear sky now choked by the burning remnants of civilization. The colony's defenses, weak and underprepared for such a devastating attack, crumbled in an instant. The Andorians were meticulous in their destruction, leaving no survivors, no witnesses, only scorched earth and death. Among the chaos, one young man, Terry Holmes, sprinted through the streets, trying to escape the inferno that was swallowing the city. His lungs burned as the acrid smoke filled the air, and sweat poured down his face, evaporating in the heat of the flames. Terry had seen his family disintegrate before his eyes, his friends lost to the fire. There was no time to mourn. There was only the burning need to survive. He had heard rumors of the cryo chambers that were hidden beneath the colony. They were built as a last resort, a final hope for humanity in the event of a doomsday scenario. The chambers could freeze human bodies, preserving them for centuries, halting their aging and slowing life signs to nearly imperceptible levels. But no one had ever tested them, not on humans, anyway. They were a theoretical solution, something built to be used in case of utter catastrophe. And now, as Terry ran for his life, it seemed like the perfect time to test them. Terry was no soldier, no hero, just an ordinary engineer who had been caught in an extraordinary nightmare. But his mind raced with one single thought: survival. If the Andorians didn't kill him, the fire would. If the fire didn't kill him, the collapse of the colony's infrastructure would. His only chance was the cryo chambers. As he neared the chamber's entrance, a group of Andorian soldiers appeared, their glowing red eyes piercing through the smoke. They moved in sync, an unfeeling army bent on destruction. At their head was Mira, a cold and calculating Andorian officer who seemed to take great pleasure in watching the humans burn. She leveled her ionized plasma rifle at Terry's chest, her expression unreadable. Terry's heart raced. He knew there was no way out. His only choice was to act. With every ounce of his strength, he hurled himself toward the nearest cryo chamber. His fingers fumbled for the controls, desperation driving him as Mira's rifle hummed with power, the deadly weapon aimed directly at him. But then, something strange happened. Mira hesitated. Her fingers stayed poised on the trigger, her eyes narrowing as if she, too, was unsure of the decision she was about to make. Terry didn't have time to think about it. The moment the cryo chamber door slid open, he dove inside, sealing himself in. As the freezing liquid began to envelop his body, his consciousness began to fade. The last thing he heard was Mira's voice, faintly coming through the speakers, perhaps a whisper of regret or pity, but it didn't matter. The cold took him, and he slipped into an endless sleep, leaving behind the chaos, the destruction, and the heartache of Arcadia. But what Terry didn't know, what none of the surviving humans knew, was that their cryo-sleep would be the key to humanity's future. As the Andorians continued their campaign of terror across the galaxy, humanity's greatest weapon lay dormant, waiting to awaken and confront the ancient enemy that had torn their world apart. The galaxy would change forever, but it wouldn't be the Andorians who would decide the future. No, that decision rested with humanity. The awakening. The years stretched on, but for Terry Holmes, time had ceased to exist the moment the cryopod sealed him inside. The freezing liquid suspended his body in a state of stasis, halting his aging and shutting down all vital functions. For him, it was a momentary lapse in consciousness, a break in time that would feel like the blink of an eye. But for humanity, a decade passed in the blink of an eye. The Andorians' campaign of terror continued, leaving human colonies in ruins across the galaxy. The cries of desperate civilians, the final stand of soldiers, and the last hopes of families, all faded into history as humanity's light dimmed. For a decade, the Andorians hunted down humanity's colonies with brutal precision. One by one, planets were erased from the stars, and entire generations of humans were lost in the fires of war. The Andorians moved through the galaxy like a plague, their advanced technology rendering any defense useless. The few remaining pockets of humanity were scattered and hidden, each day becoming a futile attempt at survival. But as the Andorian war machine advanced, something else began to stir, something humanity's enemies had not counted on. The cryo chambers. The cryopods, designed to protect humanity's last hopes, were an untested technology. They had been built as an emergency measure, a last resort for catastrophic events. But now, after the devastation wrought by the Andorians, they became humanity's salvation. Unbeknownst to the invaders, the cryopods contained the seeds of humanity's rebirth. One by one, across the galaxy, scattered human survivors, engineers, soldiers, civilians, slowly began to awaken. Their bodies slowly thawed, and the frozen fog in their minds cleared. Some were alone in the wreckage of their worlds, while others woke up surrounded by the decimated remains of human colonies. Each person who awoke was a new warrior in the fight to save their species, a species that had been decimated but not destroyed. Terry awoke first. His eyes snapped open, and for a moment, he couldn't remember where he was or what had happened. The cryopod was dark, cold, and silent, except for the low hum of the machinery that kept him alive. As the ice slowly thawed from his skin, His mind scrambled to make sense of his surroundings. His heart raced as memories flooded back. Arcadia, the attack, the fire, the Andorians. His breath came in ragged gasps as he struggled to sit up, his muscles stiff from the prolonged cryo-sleep. Panic clawed at his chest. He had no idea how long he had been asleep. Was the war over? Had the Andorians destroyed humanity completely? He pressed his hand to the cold surface of the pod, his fingers trembling, and saw his reflection in the glass. His face was gaunt, and his eyes had the hollow look of someone who had been through hell. Yet, somehow, he was still alive. The pod's control panel flickered, and a soft voice filled the room, crackling with static. It was a woman's voice, cold but familiar, as though it had been recorded long ago. Cryopod initialization complete. Please proceed with caution. This facility has been compromised. Compromised. Terry muttered to himself, confusion clouding his mind. What did it mean? What had happened while he was asleep? He staggered out of the pod, the cold metal floor pressing against his bare feet. His surroundings were unfamiliar. He was no longer in Arcadia, nor anywhere near his home. The room he was in was a cold, sterile laboratory, the walls lined with abandoned cryopods, now mostly dormant. A single glowing screen flickered in the corner, displaying only fragmented data and static. Where am I? He asked aloud, his voice shaking with uncertainty. Terry's fingers found their way to the control panel and began pressing buttons, desperately trying to access any information. After a few moments, the screen displayed a single line of text. Survivor 1. Location unknown. Status critical. Critical? He didn't know what that meant, but it wasn't good. His heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the room. No one else was awake. He was alone, at least for now. Terry grabbed a nearby coat from a rack, wrapping it around his shoulders as he moved toward the exit. He needed to get out of there, to find answers, to see if anyone else had survived. The war, the Andorians, it had all seemed like a nightmare. But the nightmare was still real, and humanity was still in danger. The door opened with a hiss, revealing a long corridor. The lights overhead flickered, casting eerie shadows along the walls. The air was cold, stale, and musty, as if the facility had been abandoned for a long time. But there was something else, a faint, almost imperceptible hum beneath the silence, like the remnants of some long-forgotten machinery still working behind the scenes. Terry's footsteps echoed as he moved forward, his eyes darting back and forth, searching for any signs of life. Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence. Terry, is that you? Terry froze in his tracks, his heart leaping in his chest. The voice was familiar, yet distant, soft and tinged with the same fear that had been in his heart when he first activated the cryopod. He turned sharply, his eyes scanning the empty hallway. But there, just a few feet behind him, stood another figure, a woman, slightly disoriented, but alive. Her face was pale, and her hair disheveled, but there was no mistaking it. She was human, and she had survived. Terry, what's happening? She asked, her voice cracking. Where are we? What happened to Arcadia? Terry blinked in disbelief. It was Miranda, an old friend from the colony. How was she here? How was anyone here? I don't know, Terry replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. I woke up in a cryopod. The Andorians. They destroyed everything. I thought it was over. I thought we were all dead. Miranda's eyes filled with the same confusion, the same fear that Terry had felt just moments ago. I don't know how we survived. I don't know how any of us survived. But we have to find out what happened, and fast. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the corridor. The sound of heavy footsteps, alien footsteps, came closer. The Andorians had found them. They were not gone, not defeated, not by a long shot. Stay close, Terry whispered, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon he didn't have. The only thing he had now was his wits and his will to survive. And with that, Terry and Miranda began their journey into the unknown, ready to uncover the fate of humanity and face the horrors that still lurked in the dark corners of the galaxy. Into the heart of the war. The dim corridors of the Cryo facility felt eerily silent as Terry and Miranda navigated through the cold, forgotten halls. Their footsteps echoed unnervingly off the metal walls, the sound amplified by the stillness around them. Each corner they turned seemed more unfamiliar than the last, as if the very structure of the facility had been twisted by time and neglect. Whatever this place had once been, it was no longer the sanctuary it was meant to be. The once bright emergency lights flickered erratically, casting brief, sharp shadows along the long, empty passageways. The air was thick with the musty scent of dust and disuse, a haunting reminder of how long humanity had been lost. Terry's mind raced as they moved deeper into the facility. The cryopod's data had been sparse, almost as if it was warning him of something far worse than he could comprehend. What had happened after the Andorians' attack? What had become of the world he once knew? He glanced over at Miranda, her face pale but determined, her eyes scanning the shadows ahead. She looked as lost as he felt. He had known her from childhood, both of them raised on the peaceful, vibrant world of Arcadia. It was hard to believe that the place where they had once played and dreamed was now reduced to smoldering ruins, swept away by the fires of war. "Do you think anyone else survived?" Miranda asked, her voice a whisper of hope. "I don't know," Terry replied quietly, "but I can't imagine we're the only ones." The thought gave him a strange, fleeting sense of comfort, but deep down, he knew that survival alone wasn't enough. Humanity was scattered, lost, hiding in the shadows of a universe that had already seen the destruction of countless colonies. The Andorians had taken everything from them, yet somehow, here they were, alive and awake. But for what purpose? The galaxy wasn't waiting for their return, it was continuing to burn. Ahead, the corridor split into two paths. One led to a dimly lit doorway that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and the other led deeper into a series of maintenance tunnels. A low hum reverberated through the walls, making the air seem charged with static. Terry could feel the pull of the strange doorway, but his instincts pushed him toward the maintenance tunnels. "We need to find out what happened to the others," Terry said, his voice firm. "Let's head down there. Maybe we can find some answers." Miranda nodded, her face hardening with resolve. "You think they're still out there?" "I don't know, but if they are, we need to be ready. The Andorians didn't just leave us alone. They're still hunting us." As they descended deeper into the maintenance tunnels, the air grew colder. The walls were lined with machinery, tubes, and wires that hummed with long-abandoned energy. It was clear that these areas had once been used for repairs, maintenance, and possibly even defense systems. The systems now seemed dormant, half-wrecked by time and neglect, but some part of them still flickered to life as they walked through the cavernous space. Then, as they reached a junction in the tunnels, they heard it. The distant sound of metal scraping against metal, a noise that echoed through the hollow space. Terry froze. His heart skipped a beat as the sound grew louder, more distinct. "What is that?" Miranda whispered, her breath catching in her throat. Terry motioned for her to stay quiet, then gestured for her to follow him. They moved stealthily along the walls, the sound of their steps muffled by the thick layers of dust and grime. The metallic scraping intensified, accompanied by low growls and strange guttural sounds. Terry's gut twisted as the noises came closer. The Andorians were here too. They had found their way into the facility. Terry peered around a corner cautiously, and his eyes went wide with shock. Ahead of them, a group of Andorian soldiers was clustered around a glowing, malfunctioning console. They were speaking in their guttural alien language, but Terry could make out one word that stood out above the rest. Cryo. They had discovered the Cryo facility. Terry's mind raced. They couldn't let them get to the pods. If the Andorians found the remaining survivors still frozen in Cryo-Sleep, they would wipe them out before they even had a chance to fight back. The Andorians had already eradicated entire human colonies, and now they were hunting the last remnants of humanity. The thought made Terry's blood run cold. "Miranda, we need to stop them," he said, his voice low and urgent. "How?" she whispered, her eyes darting between him and the Andorian soldiers ahead. "We don't even have weapons." "We use the environment," Terry said, his voice a grim whisper. "We can't take them head on, but we can slow them down long enough to reach the pods. Once we're there, we can shut down the systems and lock them out." Miranda nodded, though her face was still filled with doubt. "Let's do it." They moved silently through the tunnels, making their way toward the central control room. As they passed through a series of maintenance vents, Terry noticed something: a glowing red light on a nearby terminal. A message was flickering on the screen, the text scrambled and corrupted by years of neglect. But one line stood out clearly: "Emergency protocol. Final defense system engaged." Terry's heart skipped. He had no idea what the final defense system was, but he could feel that it was their only hope. "Miranda, stay here," Terry whispered. "I'm going to see if I can trigger the defense system. It might give us a chance." Miranda opened her mouth to protest, but Terry was already moving toward the terminal. His fingers flew over the keys, trying to bypass the scrambled system. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, the noise of the Andorians growing louder with each passing second. He couldn't fail. With a final decisive click, the terminal hummed to life. A system message appeared on the screen, and Terry grinned in relief. The defense system was online. His fingers flew over the console again, activating the system and locking down the cryo facility's access points. The loud clank of metal echoed as the doors sealed, trapping the Andorians inside. Terry quickly turned to Miranda. "It's done. Let's go." They sprinted toward the cryo chamber, heart pounding in their chests, as the sound of the Andorians' fury filled the corridors behind them. The last line of defense was in place, but it was only a temporary measure. They didn't have much time. Finally, they reached the cryo chamber, its cold metallic walls standing like an unyielding fortress. Inside, the dormant pods remained frozen in time, holding the hopes of humanity's future. But the Andorians would return. They always did. And this was just the beginning of the fight for humanity's survival. Terry looked at Miranda, a steely resolve in his eyes. "We may have bought ourselves some time, but we need to move fast. The Andorians are relentless. We need to get the others awake and prepare for what comes next." Miranda nodded, her face set with determination. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for humanity."